So hello everybody and welcome to Sheffield Chamber's latest edition of our COVID-19 business support webinars. These are being delivered in partnership with Barnsley and Rotherham and Doncaster Chamber. I'm Sam Christmas, Commercial Partnerships Manager at Sheffield Chamber, and I just want to start by reminding everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Chamber's YouTube channel shortly. If you haven't already done so, please mute your microphones to alleviate any interference or background noise. And if you experience any problems with your internet speed, try turning your webcams off because that might help. So on to today's webinar, Making the Cash Flow. During these unprecedented times, many businesses are facing significant problems with cash flow. Therefore, we've partnered with the Small Business Commissioner to help inform businesses of ways to ease their cash flow issues. I'm delighted to be joined by our keynote speaker this morning, the Interim UK Small Business Commissioner, Philip King.
Good morning.
For those of you that don't know much about the Small Business Commissioner, it is an independent public body set up by government under the Enterprise Act 2016 to tackle late payment and unfavourable payment practices in the private sector. Launched in December 2017, the Small Business Commissioner leads an independent office aimed at empowering small businesses in resolving disputes around late and unfair payment issues and provides advice including on how to take action if a payment is overdue. The Commissioner urges small businesses affected by late or unfair payment practices to use the SBC's Complaint Investigation Service and promises to take action to tackle the worst examples of supply chain bullying. Philip King was appointed to the post of Interim Small Business Commissioner in January 2020. In a career spanning over 40 years, Philip has held senior credit management roles in the high-tech and communication sector and in distribution and retail. Philip was appointed Director General of the ICM in 2005 and later Chief Executive. Philip was behind the Institute's drive to become a chartered body. Philip was the author of the Managing Cash Flow Guides published by the CICM for Government and the architect of the Prompt Payment Code, which the CICM administered on behalf of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Philip is a founding board member of the Startup Loans Company, a red tape champion for insolvency and the first lay chair for the Joint Insolvency Committee. As Chief Executive of the CICM, Philip worked tirelessly with government agencies to support small businesses and change attitudes towards late payments. As Small Business Commissioner, Philip is continuing to live this passion and is directly supporting government in delivering its industrial strategy to help small businesses prosper and grow. Philip, you're very welcome. So before handing over to Philip, I'd just like to encourage participants to get involved by submitting questions via the chat box. If you don't want to send a public message, you can remain anonymous by sending a question directly to myself. In the questions box, when you send a question, it says to everybody. You can click on that and send that directly to myself or to Philip. So we will aim to finish on time, approximately 9:45. So if there are any outstanding questions, Philip has assured me that I can put you directly in touch with him afterwards. So without further ado, to tell us a little bit more about the Small Business Commissioner and their current support for small businesses, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Interim UK Small Business Commissioner, Philip King.
Thank you, Sam, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar this morning. As Sam has said, the Small Business Commissioner was appointed in 2017. The office was created then. I've been in post since January this year. The first few months haven't been quite what I expected them to be, and so I'm spending a lot of my time on webinars like this, sharing what we do with people who are generally small businesses. So the role of the Small Business Commissioner has three elements to it. The first is that we offer advice, information and signposting. So through our website, which is smallbusinesscommissioner.gov.uk, you can get phone numbers, emails and links to us. There's lots of information on there and advice and tips, but also there's a route through the Contact Us area to talk to a team of caseworkers who will talk to individual businesses and offer them support. Where we can, we give direct advice. Where we can, we give direct information, and where we can't, we will signpost them to an appropriate area or organisation that can help them. The second element is that we try to resolve disputes. So where there is a particular dispute between a small business and a larger business that isn't paying them, then my caseworkers will get involved. That caseworker will be assigned to the case throughout its life, and they will talk to a large business on behalf of the small business to get a resolution, and often more importantly, to get payment. And I'm pleased to say that in recent weeks, we've done a lot of that. Over the last couple of years, we've raised £6.7 million for small businesses. But as a result of webinars over the last couple of weeks, we've got involved in a number of cases where we've managed to get not massive sums of money, but very important sums of money to small businesses. Sometimes a call from my office has a bit more power than a call from the small business themselves. And we are charged by government to investigate poor practice. So where we see examples of poor practice, and businesses can complain to us where they believe they're being treated badly, then we will investigate that and we will come to conclusions, and we have the right to issue a public report naming a business and setting out our recommendations of what they should do to improve practice. And we then work with them to implement the changes that we've suggested they should make. And those reports are available on our website. And the third element of what we do is try to change culture where late payment becomes anathema rather than the norm. And right now, that is probably one of the most important elements of the work that we're trying to do. So for me, this is all around getting businesses to do the right thing. We need to get to an era right now when we're talking about collaboration rather than confrontation. And it's really important that businesses are talking to each other, are having productive conversations, and are doing the right thing. And we've seen examples in recent days of businesses that are doing some really good stuff. And where we see that, I'm writing personally to the Chief Exec, thanking them on behalf of small businesses for doing the right thing. The most recent example was just this weekend, Taylor Wimpey, who are paying forward some of their smallest contractors. They're paying forward in recognition of work that will be done in the future to help support them and keep them in business. And we've seen other businesses paying suppliers immediately rather than waiting until the due date. Sadly, we've also seen examples of businesses that are taking the alternative approach and are writing to their suppliers saying, sorry, you know what, COVID-19 is really difficult for us. We're just not going to pay you until it's over. And in those cases, I'm also writing to the Chief Executive, and I'm setting up conversations with them to try and get them to understand the impact that they're having. A large business might be able to ease its cash flow crisis in the current climate, and they might be able to save £10 million of cash going out the door, and that's great for the business. However, for a small business owed a relatively insignificant amount of money, that can be the difference between putting food on the table or not. And we need to move businesses from the transactional to the emotional and make these things humanized. And we need to recognize that late payment isn't just about transactions, it's actually about people and the way they live and their well-being. And for a small business not being paid, the impact of a payment not arriving can be huge and detrimental in all sorts of ways. And my mission right now is to get businesses and big businesses particularly, to understand the impact that they're having and to recognize that. And by way of example, we talked to a big business a couple of weeks ago, had a conversation with them last week, and they now understand better the impact they're having and have agreed that they will pay their smallest suppliers now rather than making them wait, which is what they had done. And they will, where they can't afford to pay a business because the sum is too big, they'll have conversations and they'll pay part now and at least get some money flowing into the small business's bank account. And I'm not so naive as to think that all businesses can do nothing in this situation. They've got to react, they've got to make tough decisions, but it's really important those decisions are taken in a climate of conversation and collaboration. So what I want businesses to do is to talk their smallest suppliers and to listen to those suppliers who have concerns and to make sure they do the best for them. I think we are in tough times. We have to behave well. We have to work together. And as we have lots of politicians say, together we can get through this, but business needs to collaborate and work in a partnership way and not try and score points off each other. I think that's me, Sam.
Thanks, Philip. So just a reminder that if anybody has got any questions, Philip, please post them in the chat box or send them directly to myself. Got a couple here to kick us off with, Philip. So you mentioned about some of the big suppliers just turning around and saying until the COVID-19 crisis is over, they're not paying suppliers. Obviously, if you are one of those small businesses that supply, is there anything that you can do?
Well, in the first place, if you've got a contract and the contract says one thing, one party can't just change the contract. So you can legally challenge what they've done and say it's not acceptable and demand payment. And there are, of course, measures you can take, such as, issuing legal demands, issuing winding up petitions, a whole range of things that would encourage them and force them to pay you. But I think one of the things you can do is to go back and say, if you're looking to renegotiate the terms, then tell me that and let's have a conversation about it. But I think it's more important right now that we have open and honest conversations rather than getting into legal battles. We know that the courts are under pressure, so that will take time. And I don't think we want to be in a position where we are, suppliers and buyers are falling out, because I don't think that's helpful. And I think what we need to do is to get those large businesses to talk to the smaller businesses. And if I was a small business and a large business wasn't paying me, I would talk to whoever I could in that business, whether that was the accounts payable team, but more likely the contact that I've got in that business that I've dealt with over the years, or even the chief exec, and have a conversation that just says, do you understand the impact you're having on me? And if you don't pay me and I go out of business, you won't have a supplier at the end of this process. And for most businesses, when we come out of this, whenever we come out of this, we're going to have to try and build business back up. And it's really important for large businesses that their supply chain is intact and sustained throughout it. And it's not in their interests to see businesses go to the wall. So we need to tap into that recognition and work with them. So for me, the advice is conversations. Talk to people and have good open conversations.
What if you're what if they're not getting back to you? What if you can't contact them? What if they're ignoring you?
Well, in those circumstances, you've got to go further. So you can write and threaten to take legal action against them. You can impose charges under the late payment legislation, so raise an invoice for late payment and interest charges. Getting hold of somebody that won't talk to you is often very difficult, but try Twitter, try LinkedIn, try different routes to get hold of people. Most people can be contacted in some way or another, and do use contacts you've got within the business other than just the accounts payable team, who may well be offshored somewhere and not even reacting to anything. So I think you've got to try every route you can to get into the organisation and talk to people.
And on the flip side, if you've always paid your suppliers on time, but you've just not got the cash to do so at the minute, you worried that big companies will start suing you or taking you to court? What do you suggest? Just the same approach, just talking to them?
Yeah, I mean, there is absolutely no point in a large business suing a small business if that small business has not got the money to pay, because even if they go to court, they won't get any money if you haven't got any, and they force you out of business. So I think it's around having a serious conversation and talking to people, and it's very important that we recognise the power of small businesses, who I know often don't recognise that and think they are on their own and they have no power at all in this. But often they do, because often the small business wants the service or the product that they can provide. And small businesses are much fleeter of foot than large ones. They're much leaner. They can deliver things much more quickly and much more flexibly. And that's why small businesses large businesses often like dealing with them. So I think it's really important that if there is a problem that means you can't pay, then talk to the large business. And sometimes it's the case that you can't pay, but you will be able to pay at some time in the future. maybe it's you can make a token payment of 10% now to show a gesture of good intent, but have a meaningful conversation. And to go back to my last answer, let me say that if you're really struggling, then talk to my office, and we can help try and get in touch with people. And we might have more influence than you might have on your own.
We've got a question from Helen, Philip. I think I'm interpreting it right, Helen. Just let me know if not. She's asking, where does it leave you if staff have been furloughed? I suspect that is if you're trying to contact businesses and their staff have been furloughed and you can't contact anybody, I presume. Is that right, Helen? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you know, this is really tough, isn't it? If there's nobody there, then clearly it's impossible to reach them. But there aren't many businesses that have got 100% staff on furlough. They tend to put a big proportion, but there will be somebody keeping the ship afloat, and it's finding them and getting hold of them and talking to them. And I think if genuinely you can't get hold of anybody, there's nothing you can do except wait. And that's a position that I'm afraid, you know, a lot of us are in. But if that's the case and you've got invoices that are outstanding and there's money on the back of that, you do have invoices you can go and talk to the bank and finance houses about, who recognise that there is money sitting there waiting to come in. So at least you've got something you can bargain with.
So if small businesses do end up having to come and use your services, is there a cost?
There is not. We are a free service. So we will act for small businesses. We will give advice to small businesses. Everything we do is funded by the taxpayer, so we're not a drain on the individual business. We are a service provided by government, so come to us, and everything we do for you is absolutely free.
Right. Couple of issues that have been raised in previous webinars is landlords trying to evict tenants for not paying rent, etc. Is that allowed? Is that legal at this minute in time?
It's not. So under the emergency legislation that went through a couple of weeks ago, businesses and individuals cannot be evicted from property. So you can't be evicted from your commercial or domestic premises. So that's now in law for 3 months, and that could be extended. So eviction is not a threat. There are lots of landlords who are taking a tough approach and saying that you've got to pay. And this is another one where we have to have sensible conversations, don't we? You know, if the landlord takes a really tough line and won't give a holiday from the rent and won't allow any sort of forbearance, then the chances are at the end of this, they won't have a tenant. And that can't be in their interest. So it needs to be a sensible conversation that says, you know what, if I don't pay you for a while, but I'm here at the end of this, I will then start paying you again, and you've got a tenant, and you know me, and you trust me, and I'm a good tenant. If you force me out and eventually I get evicted because the law changes and the temporary measures are lifted, then you've got no tenant and you've got no rent coming in and no income, and that can't be in your interest as a landlord. So I think landlords increasingly, from what I'm hearing from businesses I talk to, are starting to take a more forbearing approach, and are starting to be more sensible. There was some coverage in the weekend press about a particular landlord that's not, but even when interviewed, he was saying that he recognises he's got to be flexible, otherwise he's not going to win.
Peter has asked, is the CBILS, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, working better now for small businesses?
Well, I've got a call with UK Finance immediately after this webinar, and I'll get the latest from the banking sector in that call. This has been a massive problem, hasn't it? It's been, you know, well publicised and is, you know, on every news bulletin. From what I hear, it's starting to work better. Clearly, there have been a lot of issues in trying to get the headline, here's the support, down to the ground floor, pushing money out. I was on the British Chambers of Commerce weekly tracker came out this morning. I was on a briefing call yesterday about that, and that's still showing that the flow of money is pitifully slow. and isn't going out as fast enough or as well as it should. The banks are working hard to try and do better, and the British Business Bank is appointing more approved lenders. 4 more were approved last week, and I think there's some more coming through this week, and then there's some more being assessed at the moment. And we need to get more providers out there. We need to get the route quicker, and we need to get money flowing much more quickly than it currently is. I think we're heading in the right direction. It's starting to shift, and I think it's one of those things that's pushing against the dam. Once it starts to build up, it'll start flowing much more quickly and much better. But I think we have to recognise that everybody is doing stuff they've never done before in a way it's never been done before, with less people than they had before, and therefore it's taking much longer than anyone would like.
An issue such as that will leave businesses having to make decisions about whether they pay wages or they pay invoices, pay suppliers. What do you suggest if, you know, a business has only got enough money in the bank to do one or the other?
Well, I think, you know, for me, and this is a personal view, so this is not the government view or the Small Business Commissioner view, and my personal view is in that circumstance, individuals have to be more important. So I think that, you know, the wages is the key priority, because that's putting food on people's tables right now and keeping them sustained. But equally, you know, the supply chain is important. And I think, again, we're into the position where we have to have conversations. And sometimes that's conversations with individual workers and saying, you know, we can't pay you all your wages, but we can pay you 80% or 70%. And, you know, we'll either store some back up and try and pay you later or whatever. And in some cases, it's talking to suppliers saying, you know what, I can't pay you what I owe you, but if I pay you 10%, will that help to keep the relationship sweet and mean that we can move forward? And these are not, you know, blanket things. One of my big complaints with the large businesses that have taken what I believe is the wrong approach is that they haven't had conversations with people. They've just issued a blanket email to their entire supplier base and said, you know, we're not going to pay you, regardless of whether that's, you know, Microsoft or a tiny supplier in Sheffield. So it's really important that we get this this balance right and we have meaningful conversations. And that's tough, but we need to do that. But I think, you know, if you're in a position where it's around waiting for cash, then suppliers and buyers need to understand that if this is a case of timing for CBILS loans to come through or grants to come through from local authorities or whatever it is, then we're talking about a delay, not a non-payment completely. And that's, you know, easier to understand than just not paying at all.
Thanks. Joanne is asking, says that she's in the rail industry. Are some industries or sectors struggling more than others with cash flow?
I think clearly the retail sector is struggling because shops are just shut. Hospitality is suffering massively because you know, everything's been shut. I'm not sure I've heard anything particularly around the rail industry, but I'm not sure what level Joanne's in terms of whether she's supplying the sort of network or whether she's supplying further down the chain. The rail companies are being supported by government, we know that, the networks, because of the fall off in traffic and keeping vital services running. So I'm not seeing any particular signs around the rail industry, but I think in terms of sectors, the key ones that are hurting are hospitality and retail.
How many businesses, statistics, percentages do you expect to go out? How many small businesses do you expect to go bust over the next few months?
Well, we've seen estimates, haven't we, from various organisations that saying 1 in 5 will go bust. I desperately hope that's a massive overstatement. I think that I'm having lots of conversations with small businesses now who are doing some really clever stuff around making sure that A, they can survive through the crisis, and B, they're in a better place to come out of the crisis when it ends. So my hope is that we will see a rejuvenation of a lot of businesses rather than a massive collapse. But I wouldn't want to put a number on it. You know, it's a really difficult thing to guess, isn't it, right now? And part of it is dependent on whether it's a 3-month blip or a 9-month cyclical thing which carries on for a long time. But I think, you know, what I'm encouraged by is businesses that are doing some very clever things to make sure that they keep busy and can keep doing stuff. I was on a call last week with a girl who was a photographer, and I just started business in February as a photographer, and she'd lost 12 wedding bookings through the summer, and she was now doing, and really busy, doing still life portraits for businesses and so on, that she can do remotely and without going out and about. And I think, you know, we all need to be thinking, you know, I hate to use the cliche, but thinking outside the box and working out what we can do and how we can do things that otherwise we wouldn't do.
Well, we have got Philip for another 10-15 minutes, so please do fire any questions, any burning questions or issues that you may have. Please fire them at Philip before we come to a close. Just to recap on some of your key points that you've made then, Philip, obviously you're stressing the importance of negotiating with suppliers and staff and finding some compromise, maintaining relationships, prioritising staff, and thinking innovatively for businesses. Do you want to just touch on any other key issues, key points, key advice to these small businesses that have tuned in this morning?
Well, let me just sort of, if I can, talk about stuff that I would normally talk about if we weren't in this state of crisis, which is around some of the basic things that businesses need to do when they're supplying people. And I guess this is probably useful reference, but it's also useful now for businesses that are working and trading. And for me, there are three big key asks in the business transaction from sort of order through to cash. And the first ask is making sure that we know who we're dealing with. So if you go to Meadowhall and you look at, you know, WH Smith, and you get an order from WH Smith, you can't invoice WH Smith. Last time I looked, there were 17 WH Smith trading companies in the UK, and you could be getting an order from any one of those. And if you invoice the wrong one, then they won't be able to pay you because they can't put it through the wrong company for tax purposes. So it's really important that before we even start trading with anybody, we ask who we're going to be trading with and making sure we know who we have to invoice. The second big ask is around, you know, if I'm going to supply you, whoever you are, when are you going to pay me? And that might be the sophisticated getting the contract in place, having the terms agreed, having a formal contract that sets out payment terms and so on. But equally, just a conversation confirmed in writing that says, yeah, we're going to pay you on 30 days is really important. It really worries me that I hear from businesses that have supplied stuff, worked hard for a customer and not even asked when they're going to be paid, and then get disappointed when they find out that the standard terms are 90 days. So ask up front what the terms are, and also really importantly, ask how you get paid. So if you're dealing with a big business, they will have a process you need to follow in order to get paid. Make sure you know what that is. If they want invoices sent to Glasgow on pink paper, then send invoices to Glasgow on pink paper, because if that gets them paid, it's worth doing that. And the third ask is, if payment doesn't arrive when you expect it to and when it's due, then start asking straight away and get in their face. Do not sit there and just wait for money to arrive, because the chances are it won't, either deliberately or just because something hasn't been processed that should have been. So really ask from day one.
A couple of questions coming now, Philip. One of the participants asks, won't more debt push the cash can down the road and ultimately end up at the bottom of the supply chain with small businesses?
Well, that's a common concern, isn't it, that we're seeing. And yes, taking on more debt needs to be taken on with consideration and thought about. And you know, if the business isn't going to be able to sustain the debt, then that's a real worry. One of my relatives is a lawyer, and he's trying to work his practice through what he's doing at the moment, and he's talking about whether or not he should take a CBILS loan, for example, because he recognises that he needs to manage that into the future and see whether he can sustain repayments once all of this is over. So it's a really important decision to reach. And I think if businesses get more and more indebted, then there is a real risk that we end up in a situation where, you know, a year, 2 years down the road, we see more businesses in trouble as a result of that. So I think businesses need to make their own decision. But the fact is that in the short term, cash is being made available to keep them in business. And if they have a good business model beyond this, then they can alter the business model to make it work through the repayment of that debt over time.
Thanks. Jessica asks, can the Small Business Commissioner help with getting contracts right in the first place, i.e. assisting with getting the agreement right when you're about to work with a larger business?
Absolutely, we can. So if you talk to my team, they've got all sorts of advice they can give you. Our website's full of advice, and I'll repeat that. It's smallbusinesscommissioner.gov.uk. On there, there's all sorts of advice about getting the contract right. I think there's a link on the homepage on that particular subject, and it's really important. So, you know, in an ideal world, every small business will have a formal written contract with every customer, and it will cover particularly payment terms, but all sorts of other things, including IP and other matters that need to be covered. But at least have the conversations, and having a contract is very important, particularly if it's a long-going relationship and it's, you know, significant size.
Thank you. I will also share afterwards. I will share contact details, and I will share any useful links to the Small Business Commissioner's website and any others that Philip thinks I should. I think that's it for questions. Just give you another 30 seconds to submit any final questions before we close. Philip, do you have anything final that you'd like to add?
No, only I'd like to say that small businesses often think they are on their own, and they often feel isolated. And I understand that, and I think we're all feeling a bit isolated right now, given that we're based at home rather than getting out and about. But the Small Business Commissioner was set up to support and advise and help small business. That's what we're there for. I've got a team of caseworkers who are really eager and passionate about doing what they can for small business. So we're there, talk to us, let us help you. It's free of charge. We want to help, and we are a voice for you. So please come and talk to us.
Thanks, Philip. It was great service. And I do encourage anyone in any difficulties or having any issues to get involved with Philip and his team. So I think that looks like it for questions, Philip. So I'm going to bring it to a close there, a little bit earlier than expected, but it's not a problem. Everybody's busy. So I'd just like to sincerely thank Philip for his time this morning, giving up his time to come and speak to us. Thank you for joining the webinar, everybody. Just a reminder that tomorrow's webinar is also related to cash flow, specifically how R&D tax credits can improve your cash flow. So it's never been a more important time to see whether or not you're eligible to claim for any sort of grants or funding. So log into our webinar tomorrow morning to see if you're eligible to claim for research and development tax credits. And then we've got another 3 webinars next week, brought to you in partnership with Doncaster Chamber. You can visit Sheffield Chamber's events calendar to find out more about those, communication strategies, insurance, etc. So jump onto the Chamber's events calendar to check those out and book on. Yeah, no final questions. So Philip, thanks ever so much for your time. Everybody, thanks for joining, and
thank you.
On future
Stay safe, everybody. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.